Have you ever noticed that the same amount of money just doesn't seem to go as far as it used to? Well, that feeling is a very real economic phenomenon called inflation. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly what inflation is, where it comes from, and why it's such an important concept for all of us to understand.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a clear definition. Then we'll get into what causes inflation and how it's actually measured. After that, we'll look at a simple, everyday example to make it concrete, discuss why it all matters, and then we'll wrap things up with a quick recap.
All right, let's dive right in. What exactly is inflation? At its heart, it's really all about the erosion of value, how the worth of our money changes over time.
So, the formal definition is a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services. Now, the key words here are sustained and general. This isn't about the price of just one thing going up, like a gallon of milk. It's a broad trend across the entire economy, where prices for many things are rising, and they continue to do so over time.
And that brings us to a really crucial idea, purchasing power. You can think of purchasing power as what your money can actually buy. So when inflation happens, each dollar you have buys a little bit less than it did before. It's this decline in purchasing power that is the most direct way we all experience inflation in our daily lives.
Okay, so if prices are rising, what's making them do that? Well, it's usually not just one single thing. Economists have identified three main drivers that push inflation up, and it's important to know that these can, and often do, happen at the same time.
Let's take a closer look at these three distinct types, because understanding them is really the key to understanding the why behind inflation.
First, we have what's called demand pull inflation. This happens when there's more demand for goods and services than the economy can supply. It's often described as too much money chasing too few goods. Second is cost push inflation. This is when the cost to produce things go up. Maybe the price of oil or other raw materials spikes. Producers then pass those higher costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And finally, there's built-in inflation. This one is really about expectations. If everyone expects prices to rise, workers might ask for higher wages. Businesses, in turn, might raise prices to cover those new wage costs, which then leads workers to ask for another raise. And you can see how that creates a kind of wage-price spiral.
So we know what inflation is and what might cause it. But how do we put a number on it? How do we measure it? Well, the most common way is something I like to call the shopping basket method.
To track inflation, government agencies use what's called a price index. The most well-known of these is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The whole idea is to create a hypothetical basket filled with goods and services that a typical household buys. We're talking everything from groceries and gas to rent, doctor's visits.
And how do they figure out what goes in this basket? Well, it's pretty involved. Government agencies survey thousands of households to get a clear picture of what people are actually spending their money on. Then, they meticulously track the prices of all those items over time to see how the total cost of that basket changes.
Let's look at a really simplified version. Say our basket only has three items: bread, milk, and gas. In year one, the total cost for this basket is exactly $9. Then a year goes by. The prices for those exact same items have drifted up a bit, and now, in year two, the total cost for the basket is $10. So, to calculate the inflation rate, we just use a simple formula. We find the difference in the cost, which is $1. Then we divide that by the original cost, $9, and multiply by 100 to turn it into a percentage. So in our little example here, we'd have an inflation rate of 11.1% for the year.
Okay, enough with the theory and the math. Let's look at a more tangible, everyday example. This is where you can really see that loss of purchasing power in action over the long run. Think about something simple, like the price of a movie ticket. Now, of course, other things affect this price, but it's a great stand-in for the general trend. A ticket that cost around $3.50 back in 1985 has steadily climbed, to the point where it's now well over $12.
This is what really drives the point home. Let's say you have a $20 bill. Back in the mid-90s, that $20 could get you a pretty great movie date. 2 tickets, a big popcorn, a couple of sodas. But today, that same $20 bill might just barely cover 1 ticket and a small popcorn. The bill itself hasn't changed, but what it can buy, its purchasing power, has clearly gone down.
So why do we even care about all this? Why is it such a big deal? Well, it's because inflation has really significant consequences, both for us as individuals and for the health of the economy as a whole. Now, you might think that any inflation is bad, but that's not quite right.
Most economists and central banks actually believe that a little bit of inflation, something low, stable, and predictable, usually around 2% a year, is a good thing. The danger comes when inflation gets too high or becomes erratic, because that creates a lot of uncertainty.
On the negative side, high inflation is tough because it chips away at the value of your savings. It's particularly hard on people with fixed incomes, like retirees, whose paychecks don't increase with prices. But there are some potential positives to moderate inflation. It gives people an incentive to spend or invest their money rather than just letting it sit there and lose value. It can also make it a bit easier for people to pay back loans over time, since they're paying with money that's worth less than when they borrowed it.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground, so let's just take a moment to do a quick recap of the most important ideas we've talked about.
So to sum it all up, remember, inflation is a broad, sustained increase in prices. Its primary effect is that it reduces the purchasing power of your money. It's driven by a mix of factors related to demand, costs, and expectations. We measure it by tracking the cost of that representative basket of goods. And finally, the goal for most modern economies isn't to have zero inflation, but to maintain a low and stable rate to help keep things running smoothly.
And we'll end with a final question to think about. This slow, steady change in prices is a subtle but really powerful force in our lives. How does the simple knowledge that your money will likely be worth a little less next year than it is today shape the millions of decisions that we and businesses and even governments make every single day?